even probably for us as psychologists or those of you who are providing practices. I think even for those of us who are providing, it still helps to start with some large boxes, and not everything fits in it, but there are some common boxes that if you take the broad strokes look at kids' mental health needs, most of them are going to fit in a couple boxes.
Exactly. And so by us doing this, we don't want to minimize or say that these aren't complex issues or problems, and we also don't pretend to say that we're going to capture everything within these more simple categories that we've come up with. But what I think Shannon and I believe is that this is sort of hits the big ones, the ones that people are going to interface with most commonly and will be most helpful under most circumstances, recognizing there's always going to be certain things that don't quite fit.
And it's also the part that overlaps the most with the existing evidence-based practices. So some of the things that don't fit in these boxes don't always have a lot of evidence-based practices that fit them. There may be one or two that are specifically designed, but most of them fit across these categories.
So what we have found is helpful is to think about kind of three broad categories of behavior problems. So internalizing, externalizing, and attention problems. While also recognizing there's developmental delays and congenital problems that could contribute and be related to any of the above, but as far as from the mental health standpoint, we think about externalizing or acting out problems as far as kind of the things, most of these are behaviors that you can observe. So the fighting, the aggression, rule breaking, not listening, things that drive parents nuts. Internalizing problems, so these feelings of emotions, the depression, the anxieties, the not wanting to go to school, the having trouble sleeping, the feeling blue, maybe post-traumatic stress, nightmares. And then we look at attention problems, so the kids that have difficulty attending to different tasks, seem like they're being driven by a motor, they're kind of all over the place. Most disorders fall within one of these three categories. Not all of them, but most of them do. I just skipped these slides a little bit. And so then we have we decide, there's three steps when you encounter a behavior problem. And the first step would be deciding on which category they're in, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit in the talk today. And then pick a treatment that fits that category, remembering that there's some differences and different availability in different areas. So we're going to tell you about some programs that we think are good fits for each of those general categories. But depending on where you're going back to, and we can talk about this some more as well, but there may be nuances or different programs that are available. But then the idea being that you make a specific referral to that type of program as opposed to just sort of general therapy. You're going to be more likely to get the outcomes that you're looking for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about externalizing behavior problems, because that's my area of interest, and then I'm going to hand it over to Shannon to talk about the internalizing, because that's her area of expertise. So this cartoon says, tantrum scene, do not cross. Any of you guys have kids and have felt like you want to put up warning tape around some of the scenes that get created? That one's a little extreme. But we all know, externalizing behavior problems when you see them typically. And I'm sure you guys could come up with a whole other laundry list of problems that could fit within this. But we're generally looking at rule breaking, angry outbursts, not obeying, or aggressive acts geared towards other people or towards animals. And then the idea or the principle behind thinking about externalizing or acting out behavior problems is that there's often some sort of reinforcer in the environment. There's something that's maintaining this behavior that is making it more likely that it's going to occur again. And so because of that, usually the solution also requires consideration of what's happening in the environment. And by environment, I mean the people around the child that's acting out or having behavior problems. And so really the key with this is to involve caregivers and people that are in the environment, because they're the only people that can change it.
And I don't know about y'all's experience with behavior problems, but many times we'll work with providers or referrers who have a kid with a behavior problem in one-on-one therapy with a kid. And for any of you who have clinical experience, I'm not sure if you've ever been able to talk a child out of a behavior problem. But that's not common.
You really don't want to be hitting your sister and brother. I promise that's not what you want to be doing. It's just not generally the effect. Any of you guys have kids, you know that it's hard to talk kids convince them that really the desirable behaviors what they really want to be doing and the undesirable behaviors are what they don't want to be doing. Sometimes it works. We're not saying it doesn't work all the time. But generally speaking, if you had to put your money somewhere, it's not going to be talking the kid out of a behavior, but it's going to be changing the contingencies within the environment that the kid is existing in to stop the behavior from occurring and really reinforce the opposite behavior or the behavior you want to be seeing more of. And because of this, and because also, have any of you all ever tried to self-reinforce yourself for something? You know, maybe you're doing a new exercise plan or a new diet, or there's something that you're kind of keeping track of in your life, and you say, okay, if I get to this goal, then I'm going to, you know, buy a new outfit, I'm going to go out to dinner, or do something like that. And sometimes that works in the short term, but has anybody had success doing that over the long term? Self-reinforcing yourself? Sometimes, yeah, Wayne, you're in another category. We didn't have a Wayne category. But typically it doesn't work well to self-reinforce. There has to be somebody else in the environment. When you go to work and you tell yourself you do a good job, sometimes that's good for your self-esteem, but if one of your coworkers tells you, hey, I think you're doing a good job, I really like what you're doing, that actually really is meaningful and can reinforce whatever behavior it is that you're doing. It's the same thing with kids, same principle. And because of that, we say for kids with acting out, externalizing behaviors where we want their behavior to change, and we know we can't talk them out of it, that we have to change the environment that they're in, the caregiver involvement is required. It doesn't mean that it has to be all, you know, you can certainly have the kid involved, but there has to be a caregiver component within these interventions for externalizing behaviors. And that's because the parents are the ones that are in charge of the reinforcers at home, and they're in charge of maintaining or eliminating behaviors once they learn the skills for the particular behavior problem. The therapist might also work with the child, and some things that have been found to be really effective is teaching problem solving and coping skills. And that can be a really nice piece to add in, and a lot of really effective therapies have that component to it. But as you can see from our little key box down at the bottom, what we really want to see is some sort of parent involvement, which can be tricky. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So in Washington State, there are some specific evidence-based practices that are available and that are being disseminated through different pockets of the state. Seattle, we're lucky because we have access to a lot of these, but even other areas as well. And we just wanted to touch on some that you may or may not have heard of. So the first one is parent-child interaction therapy. Who's heard of that here? Has everybody heard of it? Not quite everybody. But many of you have. This is a very popular, hugely well-researched, effective program, especially within the child welfare population. We're really excited about it. And what is involved with this is the caregiver's coach to respond to the child by praising positive behaviors, which we know helps kids engage in more of those behaviors. You're telling them what to do. And then ignoring obnoxious, annoying behaviors that aren't dangerous. And then handling other behavior problems that might be more dangerous appropriately, effectively, and consistently. So it's a whole package of interventions that are delivered. The parent is taught, it's called differential reinforcement. Reinforce the positive, try and ignore, extinguish the behaviors that you want to be seeing less of. It's done in a caregiver-child dyad. Usually there's a one-way mirror, there's live coaching. It's a really, it's a fun intervention to deliver, but it is labor-intensive as well. It expects a lot of the parents to come into these sessions and be coached with a bug in the ear. But for the parents that are able to do that, it's a really, they get really exciting results.
And in Washington, we're delivering it a lot in homes as well through family preservation services. So that can be nice for families who can't come in. And it can be delivered pretty effectively in the home.
And that's a good point, because a lot of these therapies were originally designed to be delivered within the office setting. And it seems to me that more and more research is coming out where they're looking at what does it mean to deliver each of these interventions in the home, recognizing, especially with rural issues, and that plagues a lot of families in Washington State too, but how can we get these interventions effectively to the families where they need them when they need them?